Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with host Peter DeWitt. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure every student is learning, not by chance, but by design.
Hey, Peter. We are here at another episode of Leaders Coaching Leaders with, once again, an absolutely phenomenal guest. This guest has done us the favor of telling us quite a bit about his background on the actual podcast, so I will share about it. Maybe I can probably go pretty quickly and no worries that you all will hear more about his work. But today we had on Dr. Joseph Johnson, who is the former / transitioning executive director for the National Center for Urban School Transformation. He has worn many hats: teacher, school administrator, district administrator, State Department official in 2 states. At the former U.S. Department of Education, he's been a Title I director. At the university level, he's done research on educational leadership. He's been a College of Education dean. He's a university provost, and on and on and on. The heart of his work, anybody who listens to me talk for more than 12 minutes, is very tied very near and dear to my heart because he centers on high-performing urban schools. His recent book is called When Black Students Excel: How Schools Can Engage and Empower Black Students. And I was saying and thinking that it was very hard for me while I was listening to this fantastic interview just to stay quiet. I didn't know if the mute function really worked, and I'm glad it does. Because so many things were said that are just spot on. And here's my realism for the week. Lots of people talk about equity, and I think they really believe in equity. I don't doubt it. But what we don't always get is the connection to people who are actually going into the actual schools, rolling up their sleeves, getting into the work, and talking plainly about what schools are doing differently when they're able to thrive, and do it in a way where, like so much of the theme of our podcast is, it is not about shaming or telling other schools that they're bad. It is about being honest about what's going on the ground. And if you're listening to us, you are likely a person who is interested in solutions. And if you were honestly trying to figure out, like, how do I make it better in such a complex organism as a school, this is the kind of guest that can really, crack that door open for you. On our podcast, we can't go all the way, but we really try to give you enough so that you know how to follow up. And if you are interested in really being a game changer when it comes to the outcomes of historically disadvantaged, underserviced, all of the words we use, students, then this is the guest. You're not going to get a better one.
No, and I mean, just from the moment he started talking, I could tell I felt myself leaning in. And this is what I want to say. Just like when we had the authors of Leading While Female on, we look and we see that it's National Center for Urban School Transformation. Well, I don't work at an urban school. I promise you, this is for you. It doesn't matter what kind of school system you work in. Joe Johnson is somebody that you can learn from. And I highly recommend, because I will be doing deeper work. I mean, obviously, I read about everybody before I interview them and I learn about their background, but he's somebody that I'm actually excited to actually learn more about and his work as I move forward. So I just want listeners to understand that when you're listening to this conversation, it is incredibly powerful, regardless of whether you're in an urban setting or not. This podcast is for you. And I feel like all I have to do is bring up a question, and then he was going with it. And it really was a wonderful interview. So I'm excited for listeners to listen.
Yeah, without further ado, let's let listeners get into it. Okay.
Joe Johnson, welcome to the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you.
I'm thinking the honor's mine. You really have a deeply impactful background. And although most of your role over the past, 15 or 20 years has been the National Center for Urban School Transformation, you have a lot of experience. So could you kind of give listeners your background a little bit?
I started my career as a teacher way back in a prior century. And after being a teacher, a school administrator, district administrator, I started work with the Texas Department of Education, the Texas Education Agency. I also worked with the Ohio Education Agency. So I've worked with 2 state departments of education. For a while, I was in Washington, D.C. with the U.S. Department of Education, directing the Title I program and actually a broader suite of programs focused on schools that served low-income communities. I spent time at the University of Texas as a researcher, and then, as you mentioned, for the past 18 years, I've been at San Diego State University. I came there as a professor, but really with the focus on creating this National Center for Urban School Transformation. While I was there, I took on a few side jobs as a dean of the College of Education and the provost of the university. But my heart has always been in this place where I just knew we needed to learn from amazing schools that were achieving outstanding results for all demographic groups of students.
Those are some pretty heady side jobs, by the way. That's not usually what you hear as a side job. And I just realized you made me feel really old when you said you started teaching in another century. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I haven't even considered it that way. Now I'm feeling like a little distraught. You're going to have to help bring me out of it a little bit. But so let's talk. I taught for 11 years, and most of those years were in small urban settings. And so I know that I've faced those obstacles, right? We've seen the obstacles, we've heard about the barriers, we know about the work like Savage Inequalities from Jonathan Kozol.
Yes.
So what brought you into creating the National Center for Urban School Transformation? And then what is the work you ended up doing? Because you had a lot of success and have had a lot of success where this is concerned. So first and foremost, what brought you into it to start this National Center?
So when I was at the University of Texas back in 1995, I acquired a small grant where the focus was to identify schools in Texas where low-income schools that serve low-income communities were achieving great results on what was then Texas's new state accountability system. And these were schools where there were significant populations of Latinx and Black students. And so that study generated a substantial amount of attention. And then subsequent studies kind of added to that. And so a number of years later, the dean of the College of Education at San Diego State, along with the university president, they acquired grant funding to establish this new center, and they both knew about the research that I had done, and they actually invited me and my wife to play roles at San Diego State, and so that's how this started.
So what kind of strategies have you used and have you seen used in schools and urban settings that have been enormously helpful, even whether we're looking at it from the student perspective, the teacher perspective, or the leadership perspective? I know that's a big question for a 30-minute podcast, so I'm sorry to do that to you, but seriously, what are the strategies that you've seen? Let's start with leadership.
Yeah.
Because this is a Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast. What strategies have you seen leaders use that have been really successful?
Yeah, that's it. That is a really important question. And, the truth is, in so many ways, it's all about leadership. Mm-hmm. But leadership at different levels, right? Yeah. But I'm going to take your question in the spirit of what do school leaders do that really makes a difference here? And I would say that in every one of the schools that we have identified, celebrated, studied, we find that there are leaders who passionately believe that their students of color can and should succeed. Mm-hmm. But it's important to know that it wasn't just a philosophical belief. Mm-hmm. It was a driving commitment. Mm-hmm. These folks just would not be satisfied with low levels of academic success for Black students, for Latinx students, for any other racial ethnic group. And it's it's dramatically different from some schools mm-hmm. where people talk about the disappointing results, but they talk about it as something that's just a permanent part of the landscape. We talk about collective teacher efficacy, mm-hmm. right, as something that that we know is important, but we don't often talk deliberately about how collective efficacy to do what? Collective efficacy to accomplish what? And I think that there are some schools where there's wonderful collective efficacy around educating certain demographic groups of kids, but not necessarily collective efficacy about elevating the academic, behavioral, social success of students of color. And so in these schools, we see leaders constantly bringing the data to the table and highlighting opportunities to improve teaching and learning, to improve the culture of the school. These leaders weren't afraid to talk about issues of race and ethnicity and culture. They weren't willing to accept conventional excuses for poor results. Mm-hmm. They knew that it was so important to listen to Black students, to to listen to the parents of students of color, to tap into their wisdom about what might help them create programs and strategies that would better meet the needs of those students of color. They engaged everybody in the spirit that together we can do this. We can do something special. We can create something powerful for our students of color. And they were able to get people to commit to specific courses of action. And then they constantly monitored their progress, and they continuously celebrated outcomes. They made students feel like success was imminent for them. And they helped teachers and parents and support staff feel like heroes because of the work they were doing to generate these phenomenal successes for Black students, for other students of color.
I have so many questions because I do. When I hear you speaking about they're involving, these school leaders are involving students and families, it makes me think of one of the growing trends, or at least one of the strategies I hear about a lot: empathy interviews, interviewing students and what their obstacles are. When you were talking about, having that hyper focus on learning, it's like I'm hearing you talking about they don't suffer from initiative fatigue, and they know what initiatives are actually going to be most impactful, and they have that laser-like focus. When I hear you talking about they're bringing data to the table all the time, I was just having a conversation with somebody also in San Diego, Jim Marshall, who has a book on program evaluation. And it makes me think of what he was talking about on one of the podcast interviews about program evaluation. I guess, but also the overall umbrella is, it sounds like it's just really good leadership. So my question is, why doesn't it happen? Why doesn't it happen enough? I know that, I work in states where, just from my role at Ed Week and everything else, there are states that are banning conversations about race. And Tanya, my editor, my partner on this podcast, we're always focusing on the worst conversations are the ones we don't have. And it sounds like you're also talking about the fact that these leaders are engaging in the conversations that other people don't want to engage in. And I guess my question to you is, over the years that you've been doing this, why aren't people engaging in those conversations? Why is mediocre or failing enough? Why is it that people lower their expectations of students and just kind of say, this is who we are and move on, when there are so many great examples that you can provide of schools that have obstacles against them, but they're doing more than just really well. They're outperforming.
Yeah. Great question. And I think that there are multiple answers. The first, I think, is that many people assume that this, whatever their status quo is, this is as good as it gets for this population of students. And so they do not know that there are similar schools with similar challenges, similar demographics, similar drinking water, that have achieved substantially better results. And so if I assume that this is as good as it gets, then I don't experience cognitive dissonance when I see data from my school. I may not love the data, but I say, well, not bad considering that I'm serving these kids. So this is part of why our center started with the focus on identifying and highlighting those schools and trying to put a spotlight on those successes in a way that would say to people, whoa, no, what you're doing is not as good as it gets. We need to recognize that there are mortals out there who are making these kinds of dramatic differences in the life chances of Black and brown kids. And so that's first. But then when they do acknowledge that, yes, things could be better, the question is, do we know how to make them better? And I think that there are a lot of educational leaders who know the vocabulary of school reform. They've read your books. Maybe they've read some of my books. They know the words, but they don't necessarily know what it really looks like, what it really means, what it really takes in order to implement those concepts in a way that is going to drive change. And then there's also a third factor that I would say is that when they figure that out, when they figure out what they would need to do, then there is this recognition that, oh, wow, that's going to be hard. Because I've got these teachers in my math department who are absolutely convinced that they are doing amazing work because they are all wonderful mathematicians. And they think that the fact that half of their students failing their course is a badge of honor because it shows how rigorous their expectations are. And so if really attacking this issue means trying to get those folks to rethink what's really important, wow, that's going to be hard. And so I think the combination of those factors is really difficult. I also think that even when leaders have figured out all those things I just described, knowing how to work with teachers and counselors and other support staff, knowing how to work with them in a way that will build their capacity to create classroom climates in which students of color feel valued, feel respected, feel loved, knowing how to work with teachers in a way that causes them to rethink the logic of their grading systems, or even to acknowledge that there is no logic in their grading systems. And all of these things that require a reconceptualization of how we go about doing school. The recognition that, hey, the truth of the matter is that maybe part of the reason that we're getting these very different results for different demographic groups of students is because our systems weren't set up to generate success for all students. Our systems were set up to sort kids, to figure out, okay, you, and you will go on to college, and you, and you will go to the factories and the fields. And for many years, we kind of accepted that. And so if we, in fact, truly want systems that are going to generate success, leaders not only have to believe that the success is possible, but they have to know how to work with their teams in a way that leads those teams to reconceptualize what school is, what it looks like, how it works, in a way that's going to ensure that all students are likely to succeed.
That was a very powerful answer all the way around. And it made me think of last September, I was working in a southern state. I was going to be training leadership teams from across the state. And there was an urban school that came. There were a few urban schools that came, one that had been taken over by the state. And I walked over to them just to introduce myself and say, hi, I'm Peter. And I just asked, why are you here? And they said, we don't know. And and it was for strengthening instructional leadership teams. So I was a little surprised by the answer. And I said, so are you the instructional leadership team? They said, no. I said, so what team are you? And they said, we're called the empowerment team. And I said, awesome. What does that mean? They said, we don't know. And they were not being sarcastic. They really were not.
Yeah.
In that day, I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to be here for 6 days, 6 days over 3 months, 2 days at a time. And I had to figure out, like, how do I help them if they don't even know why they're in the room and they're coming for 6 days? And I ended up creating a slide because as I moved on, I thought, you know what? They're probably not the only ones. And I created a slide that just said, do you know why you're in the room? Do leaders and teachers even know there's a problem? Do they have the understanding, the knowledge and skills to address the problem? And is what I'm doing actually giving them the knowledge, understanding, and skills. And I put it up in another state. I went to another state to work with directors, and one person said, oh my gosh, that happens to us all the time. And I remember talking to this one group because I was doing these half an hour intercessions in between. And I said, they said, we're a failing school. And one of the members said, well, we're only a couple of points away from a D. And they said, well, you know what? They've been saying that for 10 years. And I'm listening to this just going, oh my gosh. So we get back together and I said, we need to talk about what are you doing? Like, what are the impactful things that are going on? What are you doing right? Instead of people always talking to you about what you're doing wrong. And one of the teachers said, you are the first person to ever ask us what we're doing right and consider that we could be doing something right. And when you were just talking, I feel like all of that was coming back at me because When we're talking about urban schools, it feels like urban schools will sometimes have so many experts coming at them to say what they need. And what I like about, what I value about what you're doing with the center is that the expert isn't just some person, it's some consultant like me coming in. You've got actual schools in their setting, experiencing the same issues, talking to them about what they are doing right. And that's got to be a very powerful vicarious learning experience, much more powerful than an outside consultant can provide.
We hope so. And so we try to do a lot of spotlighting these amazing schools, spotlighting these leaders, but we try to do so in a way that shows that they're not wearing an S on their chest.
Yeah.
That these are everyday people who have approached real problems, the same problems that you have in your school, but they have approached those problems in a logical way that focuses people on the possibilities and provides them a quantity and quality of support that helps them feel like they're not going to fall on their face. And position themselves to be cheerleaders for the good things that come from that.
It sounds like mentoring. Would that be fair to say? It's mentoring, right?
It is. And so, and each one of these folks is different. They have, different styles, different approaches, different things that they emphasize. And so it means that if your style isn't exactly like this principle, that's okay. Because you don't have to be just like this person. But there are some practices that are worth learning about. And there are some strategies for listening to people that are worth attending to. And there are some strategies about how you look at the data so that you're not just looking for the bad news, but you are in fact also really mining the data, trying to find those glimmers of hope, putting those up there and saying, hey, in this class, we got 40% of our Black students to master this standard. And that is good, because 2 years ago, they were only getting 10% of their Black students to master this standard. So let's talk about what contributed to that success. And when we talk about it, and when we identify those elements, and then we ask, well, so how can we build upon that? And how can we make 40%, 60%? And what's our plan going to be? And how are we going to monitor that? And how are we going to celebrate those kids all along the way? And how are we going to make those parents feel like they are heroes because they are encouraging their kids and supporting them, right? And so it's all about mentoring. It's all about coaching. It's all about leading in a way that acknowledges that we work with human beings.
Yes. Yeah.
And if we're going to succeed with human beings, we need to be responsive to what's important to those human beings. And when we are, it still doesn't make the work easy.
Right. Right.
But it makes the work possible.
I like that. There's so much, I'm like expectations, strategies, and all this.
Yes.
And I know we have to close it down. I really would love to be able to talk to you again. You have several books. You have numerous books. Some of the latest are Teaching Practices from America's Best Schools, and then your latest is When Black Students Excel: How Schools Can Engage and Empower Black Students. Both with Rutledge, correct?
That's
Okay.
correct.
And I think as we close down, there are several ways that people can learn more about what you're doing, both from going to the National Center for Urban School Transformation, but also picking up one of your books, I'm sure offers a lot of these strategies as well. Yes?
Yes. And one of the things that we're doing with the new book, When Black Students Excel, is we're hosting book studies.
Oh, great.
Where people can virtually be a part of the conversation, and it's an opportunity for people to engage not just with the authors, but with many of these leaders out in these schools that we're celebrating and writing about. And so it's an opportunity for people to really dive more deeply into what this means, what this looks like, what it can look like for them in their schools.
Can I ask I hope this isn't a silly question, and I'm sorry if it is, but I feel like, when I'm having some of these conversations, we were doing a podcast interview with 3 authors that talk about leading while female. And one of the things that I talk to them about is I worry because people will think Leading While Female is a book just for females. And for me, when we're talking about microaggressions and when we're talking about the experience that these women are having within school leadership, I think it's a book for all people because we all need to learn from this. When I'm hearing the work that you're doing, and you're talking about, the work that the National Center for Urban School Transformation is doing, I sometimes worry that a suburban school might say, oh, well, that's not for me, that's an urban setting, or rural might say, and the reality is we know that the work that you're doing has, even though it's been hugely impactful for Black and Brown students, we also know that the work you're doing can be equally as impactful for suburban settings, rural settings. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. And so the name National Center for Urban School Transformation was responsive to the organizations that provided some funding, seed funding for us to start. And certainly as we started, our focus was urban schools that were doing well. But over the years, it's become really clear to us that what we are learning is applicable to any school that is really wanting to improve outcomes for students of color.
Yeah.
But then what we've also recognized is like, okay, so in this latest book, When Black Students Excel, all of these schools are their Black students are outperforming their overall state results for all students. So some of these schools, they flip the achievement gap because their Black students are performing better than white students statewide, That's pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
But what we also have learned is that in each one of the schools that we highlighted in that book, every demographic group is outperforming this overall state averages. So you are absolutely right. This is about how do we create schools that are going to generate great results for everybody, regardless of race, ethnicity, language background, family income, or any other demographic variable.
Joe Johnson, thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you for being on
My
Leaders
pleasure.
Coaching Leaders.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh my God, it's just so much. So yeah, thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.
Joe Johnson was just amazing to speak to. And I think there were just so many things that he talked about from an urban setting and successful schools in urban settings and what they're doing. And I'm hoping that the people that have listened, not just, preaching to the choir, but I'm hoping that some people that were listening will rethink how they look at certain students within their classroom or their school, regardless if they're in the urban, suburban, or rural setting.
Yeah, again, such an honest, practical conversation, yet very inspiring, right? So when he mentioned, collective efficacy, people want that, they buy into it, and they believe in it. But when he ended with the collective efficacy to do what?
Yeah.
Right? Like we do all, in all aspects of our life, need to be so clear about to do what. When he brought up the cognitive dissonance, where people, if you are used to seeing the same thing and over again, even if it's not great, it might not be jarring for you. And how do we get ourselves out of that mold so that, we go back to why most of us became educators. We want to make sure that the children are far better when they leave us than when they came in, at least in the places that we have control over, if you will. He just has such an unrelenting belief in the potential of children and families and a respect for the field. It reminds me of Carol Tomlinson's comment about this is an ethical.
Yeah.
And we've just had so many guests that embody that. So
and he had a wonderful way of saying it too. You know what I mean? Like he just everything. I have to admit though, he did make me laugh a little bit when he was like, I also had a side job as the Dean of Education and the Provost. I'm like, those are not side jobs.
Yeah, classic high achiever, They're not. This is a man who does it all, but is very humble about all of it. And the beauty of his humility is that it plays out in how he tries to support people.
Well, Tanya,
fantastic
you knocked it out of the park. That was it was your idea to interview Joe Johnson. So thank you for that, because that just it made my day a whole lot better and gives me a lot to think about. So to the listeners, I know we've been saying it at the end of most of the podcasts. Please provide us with feedback. If you like what you're hearing, follow the show. But also make sure you rate how you're liking the show, because to me, these are some really powerful conversations that we need to have and keep having, not just a one and done, but keep having. So thank you to the listeners who.
And we're educators at heart, so we get that repetition is key. I look forward to seeing you on our next episode. This may not come out on a Friday when you hear it, but it's a Friday for us now. So Peter,
Right.
I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
I will now. You too, Tanya.
Take care.
All right, bye.
All right, Peter.
All right.
Bye. Officially. Have a good week. Have a good session.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too.